Hello and welcome to Beginners Python and Machine Learning. My name's Tim Cummings. This is a weekly session that we have introducing beginners to Python and showing different aspects of how to program in Python, and also introducing machine learning. Today we're going to be following on from last Tuesday we introduced how to create single page web apps using Python and Dash. And we're going to complete that session tonight. I hope you had a go at last week's session. It is possible to jump straight in if you want, but it would be easier if you've done last week's session as well before you do this. We've got, this is the meetup page that we've got, so it's nice if you register there. And also on this video, if you like the video, click on like. And I'm really looking for some subscribers at the moment, because if I get a few more subscribers, I'm able to create a proper channel name for my channel. Anyway, so the source code for tonight is available on GitHub. We've got a link here, so if you click on that link, it'll take you to this page here, which is the source code, and it's we've got several branches in there, so we've got about 10 tasks that we ask you to do during the session, and you can jump between each one and get the answers just by switching branches in Git. If you want to get the code from this, if you click on this download here, this gives you the URL, which is very similar to the URL to get to this page, except it's got .git on the end, and you can copy that to your clipboard by clicking on that clipboard there. There's other ways you can get it. You can use the GitHub CLI, or you can open with GitHub Desktop. I haven't tried those. You can also download a zip of all the files. I find it easier myself to clone the repository, because you get the whole history then. Alright, now some people last week were trying to use a Visual Studio Code, so to start with I will give a brief rundown of how to do that, but then we'll continue in Pycharm Community Edition. So for those using Visual Studio Code, you have to start it up. Now, even just starting Visual Studio Code, there's different ways of doing that. It's this is if you've got Python on your path and you're just using a standard install of Python, then you just run Visual Studio Code from the start menu. If you're trying to use Anaconda, then it's a good idea to launch it from the Anaconda navigator, or you can open a Anaconda command line and go to the right folder that you want to use and type code space dot, and Visual Studio Code will open from there. But anyway, I've got Python installed on my computer and it's on my path, so I'm just opening it from the start menu. Now we're going to start off by cloning the repository that we're going to get from GitHub. And so clone from GitHub. So here we just type in that URL, and I can just paste that in because I copied it from GitHub. And it's asking me where I'm going to save this repository. So let's I've got a folder here called Visual Studio Code Projects, and we'll put it into there. Would you like to open the cloned repository? Yes, we'll open that. Okay, just use the text, make the text a bit bigger for you. So here we are in our Explorer. We can see the project has been opened up, and we can look at any of the files in there. And if we look in tasks, it tells us all the tasks that we're going to do, and the other one to look in is README. So README tells you a bit more about how to set up your environment for doing these tasks. So it says to install Python 3.92, which I've done. Git and Pycharm. Well, you don't need Pycharm Community Edition. That was because you're going to be using Visual Studio Code. Okay, clone the Git repository. I've shown you how to do that. And then we get into that directory, which we are in. We've got that folder open. And then it's asking us to check out the first challenge. First of all, before we get to that, I might just we'll make sure everything's running with the master copy, and then we'll then go back to just the first task. Okay, so to run the master, to run this code, we need to set up a virtual environment, and so we're going to do that in terminal. And I've given you the terminal commands. So here in Visual Studio Code, we've got new terminal. That automatically opens up. Now it can open up in command prompt or PowerShell or even Git Bash. This is on Windows. On Mac, you've got options of just your normal Bash terminal, which is the one I prefer. But tonight I'm going to use Windows command prompt. So here we are. We can see if we've got Python available. Now on Mac you'll have to type Python 3, but on Windows it's just usually Python. And we see it's got access to Python 3.9. To work out which Python I'm running, I can say where's Python .exe, and it'll search through my path. And this one's running from users Python app data local, so it's one just installed from the local user. Okay, so that's good. Python's on my path. Now if you haven't got Python on your path, it means you didn't check the checkbox at the beginning when you were installing Python from python.org, or it means you've started Visual Studio. If you're running from Anaconda, it means you've started Visual Studio Code without going through the Anaconda way of doing that. So what you're going to need to do is set up your environment variables, and this is useful for people who aren't using Visual Studio Code, anyone who wants to run Python from the command line. So I thought I'd go through it now. So I'm just going to type into the start menu, edit the system environment variables. I just typed environment actually, and it came up, edit the system environment variables in control panel. So I'll select that. It's asking for an admin. And so here in the control panel, I've got system properties and environment variables. Now, if you've got any questions you want to ask while this session's going on, I'm watching the YouTube chat line, and I'm also watching the Learning to Code channel on Slack in our Beginners Python and Machine Learning section of Slack. If you want to join Slack, the instructions are on that meetup. So yeah, get onto that. So there's an email address there that you can ask to join Slack. But if you're not on Slack, you can just ask questions on YouTube. And I'm interested to know how many people went through the exercises last week and actually got it running. Okay, so these are your environment variables, and the one we're interested in here is one called path. So path is there's a system variable and there's one for the user variable. Okay. All right. I just thought that would be giving me a different user variable one, but anyway. So this is showing the path to Python 3.9 and this one. So if we edit one of those, these are all the folders that it's going to be looking in, and there's none there on the system path. There's on the user path. There it can pull these ones out for the user, and it's in app data local programs Python 3.9. So if it's not working for you, you have to add this onto the path, and so do the one, do both of these, one with the scripts and one without the scripts, for your version of Python. And you have to find out where your Python's actually installed to be able to get this right. Okay, so once that's in there, and then you can start your terminal and you'll be able to find Python. Okay, so now we've got Python on the path. It means we can create a virtual environment. And the command for this, for Windows, is just Python, run the module venv, which is now comes standard with Python 3, and we're going to create a virtual environment. We could call it anything, but we'll just call it venv. So that's why there's venv twice. So you can see I've created this folder here called venv. So don't ever put any files into that. That's all handled automatically by Python and pip. Okay. Now we need to activate this virtual environment. And you can see here, this tells us what our currently active environment is, and it's just the standard Python. So it's not a virtual environment; it's actually our user environment. So we want to have our own virtual environment just for this project. So to activate it, we run a script which is in the scripts folder in venv, and it's called activate. And so by activating it there, it will come up and with these brackets at the beginning to tell us we're now in the current active, that's our current virtual environment. And that'll update soon. Oh, in fact, that's for the session. So to set it up for the whole Visual Studio Code session, we also have to run the command palette. So that's Control-Shift-P. And we have to select an interpreter, and we're going to enter an interpreter path and find it, and this is where we look for it. So it's automatically opened up in our folder. So there's venv, we look for scripts, and we select the python.exe file, and that tells us now that our virtual environment that's active is this one here, the one in venv. And that's great because now whenever we start a terminal, say I say new terminal, it automatically activates the that virtual environment, even if it's a PowerShell terminal. It runs a different script, activate.ps1, but it still activates the environment there. And even if it's git bash, we'll say new terminal. You can see venv there. So in any one of those it's running. So I can just exit out of these. So I've only got one running. Alright. So now everything's running. Let's try running our Python program, and we're currently in the master branch. You can see there master, and it's got an asterisk there, so there's a couple of changes, and that's because Visual Studio has created some files that it thinks it wants to put in. Okay, no module name dash, and that's correct because we haven't yet installed the what's in our requirements. So if we look in requirements, there are 4 libraries that we need to install to run our exercises, and in Python we can use pip to do that, and we use pip install, and the -r flag says just give us a requirements.txt file, and it will install everything that's in there plus all the dependencies of those libraries. So make sure you're in a virtual environment when you are installing those dependencies. So I'll wait for that to install. Meanwhile, we can have a look here. The source code is telling us we've created a file called settings.json, and that was really just to set up that where the virtual environment is. So the Python extension that's in Visual Studio Code has created that. So the git ignore file that I've set up on this repository is included in the repository, and that's this file here. And so that's got a whole bunch of stuff here for Pycharm. I've already told it to ignore the folder venv, so that's a good reason to call it venv, because then that'll be ignored. But I haven't told it to ignore settings.json. So I could tell it at this stage to ignore settings.json. And then when I go back to here, it'll eventually say that I don't need to look at the changes in settings.json because it's an ignored file, but it will also tell me that I've made a change to .gitignore, and so I will have a change. And at this stage, it's probably not worth putting it in because we're going to we're currently in master, and then we're going to go back to an earlier branch, and while we're in that earlier branch, it's not going to have all these changes that we've put in. There you go, you can see settings.json's disappeared and .gitignore is now sitting in there with a change. So if I click that one, you can see it's saying we've typed settings.json into the end. But if you're doing a normal project, definitely stick that in there and then commit that change early on in your project so that it doesn't bug you all the way through your project that these changes are happening. You can see down here at the bottom we've got all these libraries that are dependencies that our libraries depend on, so they're just currently being installed. Okay, and that's finished installing. We got a warning from pip. If you want to, you can do that. So it's basically we want to upgrade pip, so I can do -U, or I could do -- lowercase upgrade, pip install upgrade pip, and that'll just upgrade pip for us. Now sometimes I notice when I do this I get an error message at the end, like I did then, environment error, and I think that's a Windows security issue, but it doesn't seem to be causing any problems. But if we wanted to do that, then you'd have to go to your ransomware settings in Windows security and allow pip.exe through to make changes in this directory. All right. Okay, so we've installed all the requirements, so let's have a go at running our code. So for people who've used who are using Pycharm Community Edition, you should try to do all this. All this stuff's got an equivalent there, and so it should work there as well. Okay, so that started working properly. I can just click on the link here inside the terminal by holding down the control key and clicking on it, and I believe that's going to open in. There we go. That's opened in Chrome for us, and it's our running system. So you can see I've added a bit more from the master last week. I've added these doubling guides checkboxes, so you can turn them off because I was finding they're not as applicable as they were a year ago when we first did this, because we were just starting off then. But now, because we've had a lot of people who've actually recovered from COVID, those guides are actually more messy than contributing anything. We can look. The other thing I've done is I put in active cases. So we've got 3 case types we had last week, and now we've also got active. So that's taking out people who've recovered. But you can see we had a lot of people recovering, but at the moment we're in a bit of a bad way. The numbers are just going up, even though there's a lot of vaccine around. So that's what we're aiming to get to tonight. So one last thing I'll show you in Visual Studio Code is how to change branches. So here's the Git tab. Up here we can change where we check out to. So if we check out to challenge number 7, then we'll be up to where we were last week. We'll just check that checked out all right. So in our tasks, we're up to task 7, and that's actually changed the code in place while it was running, which is pretty amazing. And if we look now, we'll see what we got up to last week. We can see we've got all these doubling days showing. We managed to select a country and a state, but we didn't do much else. So all the other stuff we're going to do tonight. So there's Queensland data, and like I say, you've got to hide all these doubling days so you can actually see the real data. Okay, let's switch back to, oh no, we're going to quit Visual Studio Code. And so to quit the app, I'm going to use Control-C, and I think that's going to be the same on Mac and Windows and Linux. So the app stopped running. If we look at the browser, we'll just see we'll probably get an error message. There's an error message here, and that's because the JavaScript is still actually running in the browser and is trying to communicate with the software, but the software is not running, so we're getting an error message. All right, I'm going to are there any more questions in Visual Studio Code? If not, I'm going to start using Pycharm Community Edition. Okay, so for those who are following last week, we just finished task 6, which was to draw that chart and allow us to select a country and a state. If I look in this commit tab up here, you'll see the changes that I made, or that you made if you're in fact, we'll do it in this window. They're the changes that you made in trying to solve it, so you can see what was done. We imported that that new figure that the code came through, and we stuck a graph in here in our layout, and we added a new callback that, and I didn't give it a very good name. I called it update text selected country, which is the same name as there, but that should be updating the graph. Okay, so I can open up my terminal and I can switch to I can check out a new branch. So -B says create a new branch. We'll just call it attempt 6. I can commit those changes, and it's just easy to commit my changes first before I try to bring in the changes from the main repository, because there's going to be clashes, because obviously we're both trying to do the same thing. And if it will try then take you through the whole merge processes, which is what you'd normally want to do in a team programming situation, but it's not what we want to do here. We want to save our changes in one branch, and then we'll go switch over to another branch and see how that was done there. I'm going to use git switch rather than git checkout, because that's a newer git command, and but checkout will work as well. Some people just find switch easier to understand. So we switched to the new branch, challenge 7. It was set up to track the remote branch, challenge 7 from the origin. So if there was any code up on the server at origin, that would have come down into our challenge 7 branch. Okay. And if I look in our commit tab, it's now saying no changes. That happened after we did our commit. It said there were no more changes to commit. I can look in the git log here and see what it's looking like. So task 6 solution, that's the one that I've just created, so it's got the latest date on it, and so there it is, that the branch is attempt 6, but the yellow one is where we're currently at, which is way back down here, which is also challenge 7, and that's got the solution for challenge 7, so we can have a look. Yes, in the proper solution we called it update graph, so that looks better. Alright, so let's get into challenge 7. We're going to provide an input and a callback for averaged days, and select a number between 1 and 5. So if you see here, we're currently averaging over the last 5 days, but how many days we average over is not selectable. So we want to choose something between 1 and 10, which is currently 5. So to do that, we'll use a slider object. So if you want to read about these different widgets that are available to use, you can look. This is going to be in dash core components. So I'll give in this URL in the in tasks.txt and probably in the README. And if you look in here, you'll see the slider, and it gives you the code for sliders. So we're going to give it an ID, a min, max, even a step, a value, and then this is how we would do a callback with it. Okay, but anyway, we're going to work that all out from the code, so let's give it a go. Leo says he just picks the branch visually and right-clicks checkout in Pycharm. Yep, that's a really good way of doing it as well. You can just, so say you want to check out challenge 8, you could right-click there and say check out this revision here, and that'll bring it in, or in fact you can do here branch and checkout, and that'll create the branch locally with that name, and you can use it then. Okay. So we're going to add into this layout, and I hope you understand how this layout is. It's just it's a whole bunch of nested functions and data structures. So you can see here this function here, html.div. In fact, that's a class. That's a constructor for a class. So it opens parentheses, and then this is just what's in these are the parameters for creating that layout. The first parameter is children equals, and that's a list, so we open the square brackets, and then we just provided a whole bunch of things that are all just separated by commas. So I've tried to use indenting to show you how deeply it's nested at any point. So we're just going to add another child into this div, and it's going to be a slider. Okay, we can do it after selected country. So it's we're going to do a label for it, and you see we've got the code completion. It's telling us the class label. Children is the first parameter. I can, or I don't need to use that as a named argument, so I probably won't bother here, and we'll just call it averaged days. And that's all we need to do for that. And then a comma. So next thing in our outer list is going to be the slider, and that's going to come from dash core components, which we've abbreviated to DCC. And to create a dash core components, we need to provide a ID, and the ID is used for the callbacks. So we're going to give it an IP ID of input averaged days. Our convention, it's just a convention, so we're just using input for all our inputs and then what it is. We're going to give it some values, so we want the min value to be 1. We want the max value to be 10. We want the initial value to be 5. And we want to set up what marks we want on that slider. So we're going to have strings for the labels, and we might use integers for the values. When I first did this, we used strings for the labels and the values, but I think they might have changed it, so now we can put integers. So it's going to be a list. I'm going to use list comprehension to create it. So we're going to use a string for the label, and then an int. So that's what the dictionary is going to look like, and our I is just going to come from a loop that's going to go from 1 to 10. So we'll go range, we have to go, the stop value is 1 more than the last value in our list. So there's 10 values in that list. Alright, there's nothing else I need to create for that. And we're going to modify update graph, that's this one here, to have another input value. So this is a list, you can see here, so we can just, in this second parameter of callback, so we just add another input into that list. Give it the ID that it's going to come from, which is going to be averaged days. If I can spell it right. And we're going to be looking at value from that slider. So now we have to give a third parameter here. Okay. And we'll put that into fig for location. Average days equals, just average days. I might put equals average days because I'm not sure what the order is. So if I look at the parameters of fig for location, it's country, state, num start, case type, average days. So we're going to rely on the default values for num start and case type. So average days is the 6th parameter there. So we'll reference it by giving it a name. Okay. So I'll save that. And let's go have a look at our code. It hasn't picked up. Maybe we're not running. No, we're not running. So let's go back to Pycharm and run our code. So Control-Shift F10 if you're on Windows, Control-Shift R on if you're on Mac. Linux is Control-Shift F10. Okay, that's now running. And we'll reload this. So we've got them looking good. We've got our average days label. We haven't got our average days slider. So let's have a look. What's our, we've got any debugging? Invalid marks passed into slider with ID. Okay. Let's see what slider is supposed to look like. Oh, it's the value first and then the label comes second. Okay. So we've made the change. Invalid argument marks passed into slider with ID. That looked pretty good to me. Let's see what they've done. Oh, I've put lots of dictionaries, and in fact we should have all the parameters in one dictionary. So it's actually not a list, it's a dictionary. Okay, I'll give that a go. And there it is, there's our slider, average days. And so we can select a value, and now it's days to double averaged over 4 days, days to double averaged over 8 days. You can see the more days we choose, it smooths out the data. There we go. So that's our task 7 all working. Are there any questions about task 7? Good. Okay. So well, let's check out a new branch. This is the GUI way of doing it, so I'll call it attempt 7. Commit the changes. My solution. That's right. And then we'll check out challenge 8. So challenge 8 is right here. We're up here in attempt 7. So it's checked out the new branch. At any time I can see what branch I'm on by down in this bottom right hand corner. You can see it's challenge 8 that we're currently on. And if I look here in my tasks.txt file, it's now got the new details that are there. So now we're going to do the starting number. Add a dash core components input object with ID input num start, min value, min equals 1, value equals 100, type equals number. And we've got to do an additional argument for that. Alright, well, this looks good. We can just add another label. So I'm trying to show you the different sort of widgets that we can have here. So all of these are different. We're going to use an input. So an input just lets someone type in a number, but it's got some little spinners to people can use a mouse to increase or decrease the value as well. So we'll set a default value to 100. Work out where the comma is on this keyboard. Alright, so as soon as I've saved that, it should actually show up in the it should show up on our web page, and it does. Starting number 100, and you can see I can put that up or down with these, or I can type over it. Okay, but we want that to actually do something, and what it's got to do is update the graph. Once again, we're going to be looking at the value of that core component. And we'll put that into a variable we'll call numStart. And you notice how our IDs, I'm using dashes because you can do that in HTML. That's pretty standard, but in Python we can't use that for variable names. We have to use underscores. All right. So if and we're going to send that numStart to here. I'll put it at the end. Oh, wrong key. Okay. So let's have a look here. Our starting number is 100. If I click an up arrow there, it's now 101. And we can see here this is a confirmed cases everywhere starting from 101. So as I change that, it changes the graph to show where it starts, and that'll actually change the original date that it starts from. So I could change that. So at the moment it's starting at January 24th. If I could change this to 1020, then it starts on January 26th. So it even changes the start date for us. Alright, now this next part of the task is a little tricky. If numStart is blank, then we want to use the default value in fig for location function. Alright, now I could go into fig for location and see what the default value is, which is, there it is, 100. But the programmer might decide, for this function, might decide at a later stage that to change the default, and we want to use whatever he changes it to. So my problem here is if I pass anything through in here, it's going to overwrite the default value. So even if I make numStart equal to 100. So what I can do is I'm going to use the parameter expansion of Dictionaries way of passing that parameter to this function. So I'm going to create a dictionary. I'll call it keyword args. And I'll check to see if anything's come from numStart. If numStart is not none, then I'm going to put it into my dictionary of keyword args. And I'll put the value in here. Alright, and then instead of passing a named parameter here, I can pass an expanded dictionary. And the way we expand the dictionary is 2 asterisks and the dictionary. So if numStart is not in the dictionary, then it won't pass anything to it, and then the function will use its default value. But if it is in the dictionary, then the function will use it. So let's see if we can see how that works. So we'll just see it still keeps working. Yeah, 1000. I just typed 1000. Now what happens if I delete all of that? It goes back to 100. So it's successfully, it's using the default value in the function when we're not giving it anything. But as soon as we give it something, then it uses that value. So that's a useful technique. It's a useful Python technique. This is really nothing to do with dash. That's just something that you can use at any time in Python when you try to pass parameters, but you also want to use default values if they if you haven't got the parameter. Very good. Once again, I will check out a branch, and then I'll new branch, attempt 8. I will save my changes, and then let's have a look at branch 9. Alright, so the code looks pretty similar to what I did. Parameters equals the dictionary rather than keyword args. I've called it parameters here. And it's used the asterisk on parameters. And you know, that's probably going to be a smart way of doing it for some of these other ones as well, although most of these widgets that we're using, a value has to be provided, or in the case of country and state, none is actually a good value, because then it means choose all countries or all states. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is case type and graph type. So we're going to use radio items now. So we're going to put them into our layout. Once again, they're from the -core components package, which in this file we've abbreviated to DCC. And we'll give it an ID. With a dash. The default case type is going to be confirmed. We have to provide all the options that they can choose from on our radio buttons. So the way radio buttons work is that they, if you select one, it'll deselect all the others. And it's just named after the old Motorola push button radios from the 70s, where if you selected one radio station, all the other radio buttons would deselect. And options have to be provided as a list of dictionaries. So this is where you do use a list of dictionaries. So it's going to be, and we'll just use the same label and value for S in we want confirmed, recovered, and deaths. So Leo said you can use the left panel too. Is that the left panel for what? For checking out branches? There's a few things that you can do up here. Not sure how you can check out a new branch from there. Alright, and we want to set the label style display inline block. Now we're doing two sets of radio buttons here, so I'll do one with this setting and one without so we can see the difference. Default value for graph type will be log. And the options are going to be linear or log. So if I didn't want to, I see what he's saying. You can use the left Git panel. So if we can check out from here. Yep. So yep, that's definitely a good way of doing it. Oh, and there's things here you can update. So that's pull some changes from the server. There's a new branch. Show my branches. And also here on this log, one thing that can be confusing is if you haven't got all selected here and just one branch, then you might not see all the things that are going on. So master's showing most things because most things do then eventually filter through to master. But I like to have it on all. Alright, I won't use list comprehension here. I'll do it out in full. So we're going to have linear, and then another dictionary. Not sure if I've got this right, but we'll try it. Log. We'll see what our web page thinks of that. Yep, I've got errors. Yes, label and value, not just S:S. So the label is S and the value is S. Okay, so once we put in a Python error, the program will finish, and we've got an error here. That should be DCC.radio items because I forgot to put the label in. So in that case, we need to start it up again. So I can just press play from down here, or Control F5 obviously, or Control Shift F10 for the current file. Okay. Okay, so here's our radio buttons. We've got case type, confirmed recovered deaths, and graph type, linear, and log. And you can see this one I've used the inline block style, and this one I've used one above the other. Now I can change by selecting linear. We haven't done any callbacks yet, so we're not going to make any changes to the graph. So let's put in our callbacks. So let me know if you're not understanding anything that I'm doing, or I'm going too quickly. But I'll assume that you're understanding if I don't get any questions. Leo's got lots of good suggestions here. Here's some more. Press Control Select 2. Control Select. You can press Control and select 2 Git branches, and then right-click Compare To. And that's really useful if you want to see what changes have happened between one and the other, especially in this case to see what the solutions are, what has been done in the solutions. So we're going to grab the graph type and the case type. Doesn't really matter what order they go in. It's just the order here has to be the same as the order in the parameters down here. Let's call them graph type and case type. Okay, and we'll add these onto the end. We'll do case type equals case type. And now in our function, it's not called graph type, it's called y-axis type. So we'll label it y-axis type here. And why have I got a message here? That's just saying line too long, so I'll drop the line back down. Okay, let's see if those changes can update our graphs. Let's go with recovered. I'll go with deaths. That's going to be much easier to see. There was no change there. No change there. ID not found in layout. Non-existent object was used in input. Okay, so this is pretty useful. Input case type, and it looks like it's because I used a capital I. And input graph type. Let's try that change. So deaths, changed to deaths up here, so that's good. And we can change it to linear, and linear gets us, totally changes the way it looks. Alright, so our task 9 was successful. I didn't do the bit here, divide input fields into 3 divs. with style break inside, but that is in the answers. So let's check out the answers, and it just requires a lot of fiddling around in this part, and I don't think you're going to understand what I'm doing anyway by my doing it. So it might be easier just to call that answer through and see what it looks like. So we'll use, I've got to put in my solution here. So we're going to create a new branch. We'll call it attempt 9, and we'll commit my change to that branch to attempt 9, and then we'll check out challenge 10. Okay, so you notice that we don't have a local challenge 10 here, and that's because challenge 10 was added since last week to the server. So if we look on the remote server, we can see, if I make this a bit bigger, we can't see that change yet. So let's pull down from the server, update selected. So master has been changed. We haven't got the challenge 10 there yet. So let's go and pull all the changes. Specify what we want from the server. We just want everything. I know it's called challenge 10, but we shouldn't need to know that at this stage. So I'll just git fetch. There we go, challenge 10 has come in. So now we can check that one. Check it out. And that's copied it locally and made it our head. So it'll be our yellow one there is challenge 10. And that's the solution. So if you look up here in our layout, you see I've just indented everything a bit more, and I've created a few divs there. So let's have a look at the solution running, and we see these are now in 3 columns, so that makes it look a lot nicer. And we can see we've got graph typers now using inline blocks. All right, so we'll go on to what challenge 10 is. So we've added another case type called active. And so to make that work, I've actually made some changes in figure cumulative. This fig for location can now handle active cases. It only shows these doubling guides if we're using confirmed. It doesn't show it for active, deaths, or recovered, because it doesn't make sense for those case types. And I've also input this inverse of doubling days into the drawing the figure, which is what we did in Meetup 97. So I've brought those changes through as well. And the other thing that I've changed is in data cache. If in this function here, series sum for location, if the case type is active, then it actually gets the confirmed, and this is stuff we did in Meetup 97. It calculates the active based on the confirmed today and the confirmed 28 days ago. So that means we can now use that extra case type, but we need to change our inputs to be able to do that. So task 10, we're going to add active as another case type in our radio buttons, and we're going to add checkboxes for doubling guides. All right. So case type, you can put it here, active. Let's see if that worked. And there we go, active is now on the list, so I can select that, and you see straight away active cases works. We didn't have to modify the callback at all, it's just passed that straight through to our figure. That's now draws active cases, and we can even do that on a linear scale. So we can see that in November, worldwide, we had a lot of new cases. In January, the vaccine was coming, and February, the vaccine was coming out. So case numbers dropped back down, but just at the moment in March, it's not looking good. It's starting to fire up again. And we can look at United Kingdom. Is really getting a good handle on their active cases. Look at the US. The US is flattened out here, about 1.6 million cases, so that's still quite a lot of cases. So that they need to be doing some more, even though they've got a good vaccination program happening. One that surprises me is Chile. Chile have vaccinated about 40% of their population, but they're experiencing a bit of complacency over there because of the vaccinations going so well, and now they're getting a big surge in active cases. All right, so add a case type, we've done that. Now we're going to do a checklist. So we'll stick it in this last column here. So this is the extra div that got created. So I'm going to put it into this list of children in that div. So we're going to have a label, and the label's just going to say doubling guides. And we're going to use checkboxes this time. Checklist. Okay, that's what it's called. So I set an ID. Put doubling guides. And we've got to set the options. And what's that going to be? It's going to be a list of dictionaries. So let's copy this. And I'll just create a tuple here. 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12. And we'll default it to 6 and 12. So we just give 2 values as the initial value. That's not really the default, it's the initial value. Use inline block labels. Okay, better do that. And we need to change our callback on our graph. And we want the value, which is going to be a list. Let's make these lines a bit shorter. Combined completions told us the parameter name is doubling guides. That's good. And the variable name's got the same name, so that's useful. Let's see how that works straight off. I've got an error. And it looks like the program's crashed. Yep. Let's see what the error message is. Oh, values. It should be value. Okay, Control Shift F10 to get it running again. And there's our doubling guides, so we can turn them on or off, which is useful because they get in the way. We can look at linear, and active is the one that I think is most useful at the moment. And you can see here, this bottom graph, we're now using the inverse of days to double, averaged over the last 5 days. Higher is worse. So let's have a look in Queensland. Getting a few cases here as we report through lockdown. So the inverse there, 0.06. So that's not too bad. That's higher is worse, but so it's a bit less than 20 days of doubling. But anything over 6 days is when you start to really panic, because that's when it can really take off. If we look at here, we can have a look at all the callbacks that we've got. This is a nice graphical representation of our callbacks. So these are all our inputs. They all feed back. It's even gives us some performance and how long it takes. And we're updating this text selected country, which is this bit here. You have selected Queensland, and we're updating the graph. And we've also got our country updates our options for our state. Okay, well, I think that's all. Let's have a look at the solution. So we'll do the save these, attempt 10. Commit those changes, so there's no changes left. And then we can just check out master, which is the final one. And I think that will just make our graph look a little bit better. Yes, you can see here I put days in the final solution, so those checkboxes look a little bit better. And you can look at the solution to see how I did that. All right, is there any questions? Like, I think that's all I'm planning to do on Dash and Plotly for now. I'll start moving on to some different topics. If people are interested in how to deploy one of these apps, I can show you on a Linux server. So it's just really how interested you are in doing that, because there's a few tricks that you need to know on how to deploy. So we could put it on a Raspberry Pi, might even work, although we are using Pandas and NumPy, and they're a little bit of a challenge to get to run on Raspberry Pis. So yeah, maybe it'll just be a Ubuntu, a PC running Ubuntu, or you could run it in a virtual machine on your computer if you are wanting to set this up for yourself. So let me know if you're interested in that. Otherwise, I won't bother. I need some interest in that one to put together a session on that. Next week's going to be absolute beginners session. So I'll be taking that one as well. So that's for people who've never seen Python before. I'll probably just continue on from the one I did last month a little bit, but it'll still be suitable for people who haven't done any Python at all. We'll be doing it in Google Colab, so you won't need Python even installed on your computer. Hopefully after that, Arun will be doing the next couple of sessions if he's available, and he'll be doing more machine learning stuff. But remember, hit the subscribe button if you've been watching this, and definitely hit the like if you liked the session. And I'm trying to get those subscribe numbers up so I can get myself a proper channel name. And yeah, send some comments. I haven't seen any comments on the YouTube chat tonight, but that's all right. When I stop the video, you will stop being able to chat on YouTube, but you can still send comments on Learning to Code at our Beginners Python Slack channel. Thanks very much, and I hope you enjoyed it.